Smarties, today we are discussing the concept of failing forward. We are talking about why summer is the perfect chance to prioritize this really important idea, how to involve parents in the process when it's appropriate, and the importance of planning for failure. We share the transformation that can occur when you prioritize this conversation with your learners and you plan for failure with them. And also we share what type of learners benefit from this type of conversation and goal. Make sure to listen to the end as we share a really simple framework for you to take to work with your learners or work with your kids as you guys work together to make a plan about failing forward. If you are interested in more of these types of conversations, we would be honored to partner with you. There are several ways you can work with Steph and I. The first is you can work with us as your educational therapist, and you can do that by signing up for a phone call on our website. Steph's website is www.myedtherapist.com. Her practice does all the things, and yes, she's virtually everywhere. And my practice is kappedtherapy.com, and we specialize in learners 5th grade through adulthood who are struggling with executive functioning skills challenges. If you are an educational therapist or a learning specialist, though, and you are building a private practice, that is another way that you can work with us. If you want to also talk through your caseload and the challenges that are emerging there, we offer business coaching, and the way that you can get started with that is shoot us an email at rachelandsteph@learnsmarterpodcast.com, and we'll get you the information you need so you can make some informed decisions. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 317 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And today we're talking about using the summer to plan for failures.
So, Steph, this episode was my idea.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
So, working with a adult learner, he's a college student.
Okay.
And before the previous semester started, we had this conversation. He was someone who, when things didn't go according to plan, and it could be as simple as like the food hall closed before he was able to eat, or he got sick and therefore got behind or missed class and didn't know sort of how to recover. And that was what the conversation was about. And so I suggested to him, I really think you need a plan for recovery. And he got really quiet. And he's like, no one's ever suggested that before. I like a plan. I like to know what to do.
Fair enough.
And it's hard for me when I don't have a plan and I don't know what to do, which is what happens when these quote unquote unexpected events occur. But they're not truly unexpected because real life is going to happen. You're going to get sick. Something's going to happen in your personal life and you need to pivot. So we need an action plan and a way so you can fail forward. And he really liked that language. So I thought this is a really important idea that actually was pretty transformative over the course of the semester. And I'm happy to share what we did. And that's what this episode is about. But I'm curious, Steph, what are you seeing with your learners who love a plan but don't have a plan for failing forward?
I'm thinking of one specific client, and when there is a failing forward plan and the failing forward plan isn't, I want to say, like deep enough of a plan, things go awry and there's a lot of anxiety and then shutdown happens. And there was a moment a couple weeks ago where this is exactly what happened. And the plan wasn't long enough. There were more roadblocks than we anticipated.
You got to do more what-ifing about it.
And so there were a lot in place, but it went even further. And we had a long conversation about this, about these kinds of moments are going to come up. This is a big part of educational therapy. What do you do when you don't know what to do? So I'm really curious about how you started putting these in place with your client.
So one of the things that we talked about in the transition from the fall semester to the spring semester is, what do we want all his systems to look like? And we really went through class by class and made a plan of what notes were going to be like. I will say this was a learner who maybe was less comfortable with technology and has had a huge transformation as we've been working together, and like has become extremely tech savvy and quick and has adopted a lot of ideas and ideologies. Having a plan about his executive functioning system, so his system for managing his time, his system for managing himself physically, and his system for managing himself digitally, was really helpful because, again, I had a learner who liked to plan.
Yeah.
We literally had a Google Doc open and we're like, okay, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? And we're documenting it. And the reason I'm documenting it is essentially it's a living strategies document, which we haven't talked about recently on this podcast, but we'll go ahead and link that episode in the show notes. So if you haven't had a chance to learn about living strategies documents, then you'll have that episode to go back and listen to. And one of the things that I added in for him is like a plan for failure. We talked about the moments of failure, and I use failure. It's not a bad word. So using that word, failure also allows for an opportunity for recovery.
Let me be clear that you don't just mean failure on a test.
That's what we were defining. So we were talking about instances where he had felt out of control and he didn't know what to do. And that had come up again around being sick. That had come up around not knowing when an assignment was due. That came up around not knowing how to tackle an assignment or chunk it down, not knowing how to prepare for tests. So all these other things that we were addressing with good executive functioning systems, but he still needed a plan for when an EF failure happened. It happens to us. I told you the other day, I showed up an hour early for my dentist appointment. And I know you're going to say, everybody's going to be like, well, better an hour early than an hour late. Yeah, but I left way early from my house. I wasn't around for the morning routine with my kids. Like, I was not happy about having this extra hour. I did go get a bagel and like call my friend and like chit chat, but I made the most of it, but I wasn't thrilled by it. And he needed a plan for when those things inevitably happened. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about academic letter grade F. Like, we're talking about life getting in the way of the plan and how are we going to adjust to it. He said the biggest thing is when I miss class, I really struggle. So we pre-wrote an email to a teacher. And we literally wrote out the steps, like, when I miss class, I will. And here are the 5 things that you need to do. And one of them was like, text me. One of them was email the teacher. One of them was like, update your calendar and check your, like, all the things that he still needs to do if he has to miss class. And so we had it documented there. And then it was just something we sort of like referred back to as necessary. But he was actually the one who kept bringing it up. But what was great was he only had one opportunity for that this entire semester because his systems are good and strong and he's independently maintaining them. But the important component is having that plan in place so that when something happens, there's not an out of control sort of feeling, which did happen. He did forget about an assignment, just slipped through the cracks, not for any fault of his own other than he's human. So that's important to remember too. When you have your systems and you're good about maintaining them, you're still going to miss an email. You're still going to show up an hour early. You're still going to miss an assignment. Like, these things happen. And he knew exactly what to do. He didn't even bother texting me. He didn't tell me about it until the next time we had a session, which was huge. And his mom even emailed me and was like, this is something that in the past would have derailed the whole family the whole weekend because he lives close to home. And that wasn't the case. He was able to just move forward because we had a plan in place.
Yeah, which is amazing because sometimes the paralysis is what delays everything and then makes everything worse.
Totally. And what was key was those good foundational systems allowed for room for error for him because he was able to look at the rest of his week and know exactly when he was going to fix the problem.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and he was able to communicate that. He had a great relationship with his teacher, with his professor, and they understood. And he had that whole metacognitive moment about knowing what it would have felt like 3 months prior when something like this happened versus now. And we had actually put more plans in place than he felt was necessary because he didn't text me and tell me.
But he also has those going forward, right? So if it comes up next semester.
And I'm sure it will because he's human.
For sure.
We can't executive functioning system our way out of humanity.
For sure.
And so having those conversations and prioritizing that allowed him to be like, oh, I know what to do. So we have two questions we really should answer is, how do you involve parents in this process? How do you know when it's appropriate to involve them? And then what type of learner really benefits from this conversation? Let's start with the latter question. What type of learners do you think would benefit from these types of conversations?
I mean,
all of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
But the ones that are going to be the most open, so let's phrase it that way, are the ones that want a plan. The ones that notice how out of control things feel and they don't want to feel like that anymore. And they have been able to recognize that, maybe not vocalized it, but recognized it themselves. You know, this conversation is about a college student that we've been having, but this could also be, you know, an elementary age kid. What do you do? I remember having these sort of conversations with my mom.
Of course.
What do you do if you go to the playground and nobody is playing the game you want to play, or your friends are all absent, or, you know, you have these plans in place to know what to do when you don't know what to do.
I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but I remember my very first night at sleepaway camp. It was like the closing circle of the evening, and that's when everybody gets homesick. You like hear little kids crying around the big circle or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's because it's really the only time of day where you're like standing still.
Yes. I remember at sleepaway camp.
My counselor took me aside because I was crying. I think I was in 4th grade, so I was quite young. And she's like, Rachel, this is why this is happening. And what you need to do during this time is make a plan about what you're going to do during free time tomorrow. It was something that I always remembered as a really, really cool tool that when later I grew up and I was a counselor, I passed that on too. It was about having a plan for those moments.
Yeah. So anybody can benefit from having a plan. Sometimes it's hard to stop and think about, I need to make a plan.
That's a really good point. You cannot do this in the moment of crisis. It has to be in the calm moments.
For sure.
You have to help learners prioritize this. It's not something that you can do when they're freaking out about something.
Yeah, because it's not going to stick. It's just not going to be beneficial. But this is why those forward-thinking conversations of your quiet time, so to speak.
Yeah.
This is also why we reflect with our learners after a semester or after a school year of what worked, what didn't work, what do you want to not have happen again?
Yeah. What do you want it to feel like? This is why you hire a highly skilled learning specialist or educational therapist so they can have this meaningful conversation. It also tells learners you need to learn to expect these things to happen, and it's normal for these things to happen. And the way I know is because it's happened to you, it's happened to me, it's happened to your mom, it's happened to your brother, your sister. Like, it's happened because we're all human beings.
Right. It's just going to happen. And that's okay.
Absolutely, that's okay. It's about the recovery. So how do we involve parents in this process? And I want to do an episode, Steph, in the future on like that triangulation relationship.
I think it a lot depends on the kid.
I think it depends on that dynamic, like the parent-learner dynamic, and like, what are we really trying to do?
For sure. And how old? And are they a manager? Are they a consultant?
So what Steph's talking about is the idea that at a certain point in the development of a child, the parent shifts roles from being the manager to being the consultant. And if that's happened, that's a really good opportunity area to kind of let the parent know what the plan will be. And even if it hasn't happened yet, sometimes like coming in and saying, this is what we're all going to collectively do when this happens, first of all, normalizes it for the parent and does everything that it did that we just said it does for the learner. It does the same thing for the parent. You need to expect this. This is part of being a human being. We're not going for perfection here.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be a really meaningful conversation to walk parents through as well. So everybody sort of knows their role and what to do in those moments because it's going to happen.
Yeah. So I wish that there was a clear-cut answer that we could give. But I think know your kid, know what works for your kid.
Yeah.
And know what doesn't work for your kid. And know that some kids get really triggered when their parents get too involved and they want to do things on their own. You can say, here's a suggestion, whether they take it or not. You can't take that personally.
Well, not taking it personally is the hard part, right?
Of course, but it's still a reminder, right?
Completely. If you have a learner who's on their way towards independence, they just may want to let you know. And if you have a kid that's letting you know, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can ask, like, are you just telling me or are you looking to problem solve this with me? Because I don't kind of know. And because sometimes you don't know if you need to take action or not. So you have to ask. Let's talk about this very simple framework that we developed that allows this conversation to be easy and not overwhelming, because we don't want to try to tackle too many things at once. Mm-hmm. And so whatever the biggest trigger for your learner is, so like for me, when I missed an assignment, mm-hmm. that was his precursor question. That was like, what are we going to do when we miss an assignment? And we talked about one thing that was proactive. So I'm going to try to prevent missing an assignment by maintaining my systems, making sure I'm checking Campus, which is his online portal, make sure I'm doing 2 or 3 things. And one thing that you can do that's reactive, I'm going to email my teacher. I'm going to text Rachel. I'm going to have a conversation with my mom. I'm going to look at my calendar.
Going to go to office hours.
All these options of things that you can do. Mm-hmm. Usually they only need to pick 1 or 2. So just something that's proactive and something that's reactive. So we can work towards avoiding it, but then knowing that we're not going to be able to 100% avoid something, what are we going to do once it's happened? Proactive, reactive. There's your framework, Smarties.
Yeah.
And I would suggest you document it in a place that is easily accessible for your learner and for yourself, whatever that means for you guys.
I like it. Well, thanks for sharing that, because I think everybody learned something today.
Awesome. That's it, Smarties. Have a great week.
Have a great week.